welcome again to the second part or second of our book group chats. I seem to have the middle seat at this time, taking over from Olivia, and this time we're going to be a little bit more conventional and talk about books we've read fairly recently, or I think in Olivia's case not so recently, and our thoughts on them. So Olivia's going to start. Fire away.
So the book that I've brought along with me today, it's not a modern book and it's not one that I've read super duper recently, but is The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, which I absolutely love and adore. I am a huge science fiction fan, and this was published in 1951, so it's a little bit later than my usual yarns. But I think most people know of it because it's been turned into films and television shows, and I think much like War of the Worlds, it was performed on the radio as well, and I think lots of people listened to it growing up, I think. So.
I don't know if there's, I mean, I'm sure there has been more than one film, but the 1950s or 60s version was one that I look back on it now and I can't believe how scary we found this as children. I mean, these are plants.
Are they plants?
Yeah,
I think I just get it mixed up, like you with the War of the Worlds. I'm thinking spaceships but
no. But it's all a bit. It's all very like politically fueled because it was written and sort of based around a kind of dystopian world that's sort of Cold War centred. It's a big threat between the USSR and.
But I mean, without giving too much away, if I remember rightly, this was some alien or meteorite that came to Earth.
So this guy, Bill, I don't know if any of you at home have seen The Walking Dead, but it kind of starts in a similar kind of way. This guy, Bill, wakes up in hospital. So he's a biologist. He's been working with these Triffids, which he thinks are a sort of bioengineered plant that was accidentally let out by the USSR. Does that sound familiar? A little bit, yeah.
I didn't know that's how it started.
Yes,
well,
and so he works with these Triffids, and he gets splashed in the eyes with this poison from the Triffids, and he's then in hospital recovering, and while he's in hospital all bandaged up, having had this eye surgery, a massive meteorite shower comes across, and anyone who is has their eyes open or is looking at it, and of course everyone's going to look outside if there's a meteor shower, gets blinded by it. And so you've got a real sort of the entire population is segregated into people who can see and people who are blind. And he wakes up.
That's what it was about.
Yeah.
I do remember that now. And isn't it interesting how so often, especially in science fiction, you have one film that, and parts of that film or aspects of it just become absolutely generic for other films.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of something that I think a lot of people have probably seen quite recently on Netflix, I think it was, called, well, there were a couple. One was Bird Box.
That's the one.
Where, again, it was a similar thing that I think if you opened your eyes and saw the entity, then something terrible happened to you. And then there was another very similar one called
But you couldn't make a sound.
A Quiet Place.
Is that the
Yes.
Science fiction was sort of really coming into its own then, and massive influence from other things that were going on in life anyway. But yeah, it's really interesting, like I said, about The Walking Dead, the waking up in the hospital, unsure of kind of what's happened. Like you said, with Bird Box as well, the idea of having your senses sort of taken away from you, I think it's quite a scary idea.
And if I mean, with so many of these films, there is usually some atonement or redemption towards the end. If I remember rightly, without giving too much away, they discover by accident the very simple, not cure, but the simple way the Triffids can be dealt with.
So the end, it doesn't end on so much of a cliffhanger, because I don't think we ever really find out what happens, but they go off and people start setting up these colonies, and it's all about repopulating the earth, and because people are dying from this mysterious illness as well that's going around, and I don't really want to ruin it, but you never really find out what happens. They just go off and sort of establish a colony.
Right. How interesting. How interesting. Yeah.
But what have you guys got?
Well, here's a book which isn't really my normal sort of book. The Beekeeper of Aleppo. It's a book which various patients asked, or I talked to them about, and got very good recommendations from people who read an awful lot. So I thought, right, well, let me read this. And I just found it an incredibly moving book. The story is set in Aleppo, is where the protagonists start off living. And it details, obviously, the horrors of what's going on in day-to-day life for people, and what prompts someone to walk away from their home, their extended family, their business, and just disappear into the unknown, knowing full well what they're likely to be exposed to. Now this is a sort of an odyssey, if you like, of this couple who have undergone absolute horrific things in Iraq, who decide to try and make their way to England. And as I say, they're under no illusions as to, or certainly the husband isn't under any illusions as to what they're likely to face on the way. People traffickers, at every corner they'll be exploited by someone for money or worse things. And in a way it's a book I felt that everyone should read, because you see these pictures on the television, read about capsized boats and the deaths, and yes, for 5 minutes it's a tragic snapshot, but what a book like this, it personalizes what these people have gone through and how awful life must be in order to put yourself in that sort of position. And they don't think it's going to be a bed of roses. They know full well what's likely to happen along the way. The characters are really interesting. Essentially, there's the husband, Nuri, and his wife, who is blind, in fact. And that's a very interesting thing, because as you go through the book, it develops a sense of exactly what caused her to become blind. And it turns out it's psychological, her blindness, psychological but real. And the book flits back and forwards between their odyssey and tales of their life when things were better in Iraq. And they do make their way to England. He has a cousin, I think it is, Mustafa. And the interplay between the horrors of what's going on and his utter passion for beekeeping and the love of it, and how he really wants to just be in England and start keeping bees again and set up new colonies. There's something very, very beautiful about the book. The story is tragic, but at the same time, it's a very uplifting exploration of the human spirit. And so I loved the book, although it wasn't the sort of book I would normally read. It doesn't come to a sort of fully sort of rounded up conclusion, but I don't think that's how it's set out to be. I found the wife initially, her character, incredibly irritating, because through all their trials and tribulations, he was very pragmatic about things, and she certainly wasn't. At one point, they have to cross, some people, smugglers are getting them to cross a river in Turkey, I think it is. And it's just a case of getting into a boat or wading across a river, and she sort of stubbornly sort of says, no I won't, I can't do it. And it doesn't sound like it's that awful. And he's very, very sort of understanding. But so often he's wrestling with her sort of, I can't go on. And yeah, that sort of got a bit irritating. But as you get to the end of the story, you actually realise how important that aspect of her character was. So it's a book which,
is it a novel, or it's not a true story, is it?
It's not a true story, but the lady who wrote it, Christy Leftieri, based it on a lot of interviews with refugees.
Oh, okay.
So yes, it is a complete work of fiction, but I think the stories of the characters and what people go through are based on real events and experiences.
Okay.
So yes, The Bookkeeper of Aleppo, a quite I don't want to say easy read.
Doesn't sound like an easy read.
No,
No.
but it's not a hard read, and I would say stick with the first third of it, because the second 2/3 is really worth it.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's my book.
Okay, well, my book is a little bit different. It's going back to the 17th century, and it is called The Smallest Man, and it's by Frances Quinn. It's a debut novel. And I just really enjoyed this. And it's a little bit like yours in that it's based on fact, but mostly fiction. So what it's about is about a very small man. The real life very small man, I think, can't quite remember his name, I think it was Geoffrey Dunn, and he was around in the 17th century, and he was 18 inches tall at the age of 7. And he was spotted by
18
somebody.
inches?
Yeah, 18 inches.
How much?
Wow.
A foot and a half.
really-
Yeah, not very big.
Gosh.
And he was saved. I don't quite know how he was saved, but he was saved from a sort of freak show, you know, the classic freak show back in the day, like the Elephant Man was part of.
Yeah.
He was sold essentially to the court of King Charles I as a sort of present almost for the Queen Henrietta Maria, I think. And so he was taken down to London from this little rural town that he was brought up in and presented to her in a pie of all things. So at a sort of banquet, a bit like somebody leaping out of a cake, he was put in he wasn't baked in the pie obviously, but he was put inside this pie and he has to leap out of the pie in front of her, and essentially became her kind of, well, initially he was given to her as a kind of a toy, like a plaything almost, and she treated him like that for a little while. So she would dress him up in fancy dress and have his portrait
And he was
painted.
what, grown up at this point?
No, he
or?
was seven
Oh,
or 8.
I
He was
see.
just a little
Oh.
boy, a tiny little boy. But as time went by, they became very close, and the Civil War happens, and there's a lot of turmoil going on. And he becomes very close to her and almost like her best friend and confidant and advisor almost. And so, yeah, it's a lovely, lovely story. There's a romance going on. Yeah, it's just a really lovely, lovely story. It's but also it's told from his point of view. So he's the narrator, if you like, and his name in the book is Nathaniel Davy. And so it's all seen from his perspective, you know, the war and what's going on. And also, because he's suffering with what's known as dwarfism, I think, sort of seen through his eyes how people treat him, which is quite pertinent to this day, I think, and how people with a disability are viewed and how he was treated and how he dealt with it. He was a really strong little character. And it's just a really lovely story.
And does it follow a sort of time scale, years, or as he grows up?
Oh my
or-
goodness, yes. Yeah.
Right.
So at the end of it, it's got a lovely happy ending. You know, he's a grown man,
Right.
but it takes you right the way through.
And does it follow historical events of the time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
So that's where it's sort of based in fact. So the historical element of the King Charles I's reign, if you like, is very accurate. And he, as I say, is a real man. He did exist, but it's been embellished a little bit for fiction,
Yeah.
I guess. I think reading an interview with this lady, and this is, I say, her first novel, she wanted to write a story about somebody with a disability. And she was just sort of researching a little bit, and she came across this man. I think there's a portrait of him with this queen in, I don't know, the National Portrait Gallery or somewhere in London. And her interest was sort of piqued by that, and she did a little bit of research into that and thought it would make a great story. Because it's a very unusual story.
Yes.
But yeah, it's really lovely. I enjoyed it a lot. I would recommend it pretty much to everybody because it's got a little bit of everything.
Oh, good.
I
Good.
think we've got a good collection there,
I think we
actually.
have
I think so too.
I think a good mix of things.
Well, there they are. John Wyndham's A Day of the Triffids, The Beekeeper of Aleppo, and The Smallest Man. When was the book written? Do you know?
Oh, very recently. It's quite a new book. I would say in the last 6 months, a year.
Right, right. Well, once again, thank you very much for joining us. Till the next time we meet. Thank you.
Bye.